The Barna Group is an organization that performs many research projects and surveys for businesses and nonprofits and churches. And one recent survey was conducted in order to figure out how literate and knowledgeable people who identify themselves as Christians were when it comes to the Bible. And the results are quite interesting. 63% of Christians surveyed could not name all of the 10 commandments. 19% of Christians could not name all of the 4 Gospels. 12% of Christians thought Joan of Arc was Noah's wife. And only 4% of Christians surveyed believed that the Bible had anything to say about poverty and poor people. That breaks my heart because that's kind of my veins. Jesus talked about poverty and poor people time and time again. Now, if you would have been included in any of those statistics I mentioned, it's not to shame anyone. I mean, you know me better than that after being your pastor for 3.5 years. And so I bring attention to these statistics and this particular survey in order to highlight that as Christians, we might not know the Bible as well as we think we do. And we belong to a denomination that doesn't have a blanket statement beliefs that its members have to believe in. Instead, we emphasize an individual right to their own interpretation. So becoming knowledgeable about the Bible becomes a little bit harder for us because I don't tell you what to believe or what is ultimately right or wrong. I trust that you are fully capable of doing that yourself. Today we start a sermon series that has been really percolating within me for some time. A number of my ministry colleagues have done a similar series and have really enjoyed the process of preaching and researching it so very much. Their congregations have gotten a lot out of the sermons that have been produced. Our last series, Did Jesus Really Say That? And our sermon series that starts today, That's Not in the Bible. Both could contain many different scripture passages and topics, all bringing in a very rich discussion and conversation. So I'm seriously considering making both of these sermon series more of an annual occurrence because there's a great spiritual richness and growth that can come out of and from them. I was very excited about the sermon series we just completed because we spent time and intention focusing on some of the more shocking statements that came out of Jesus' mouth. Because Jesus said some crazy stuff. Some crazy good stuff. It's a little crazy and shocking nonetheless. And I'm also very excited about this series that strives to question the validity of whether some common phrases that sound like they could be in the Bible are actually in the Bible. All the common phrases that we will highlight in the next few weeks in a way could be attributed to the Bible, but not based on the words themselves. None of these phrases are verbatim, literally in the Bible. But you can make a case, an argument, that the phrases could possibly touch upon the meaning of some passages in the Bible, but that's strictly based on human interpretation. The Bible, as we know, is not an easy document to read. It's not clear-cut and straightforward. Even the most unassuming and unambiguous Bible passages, such as God is love, is not so clear-cut. That three-word, seemingly straightforward phrase produces so many different questions. For example, what is the word love in the original text in Greek language? What does love mean in Jesus' culture? And what does love mean today? And is love an emotion or an action or a combination of both? I've said it before and I'll say it again. If anyone says something along the lines of the Bible clearly says, be very cautious about what is going to come out of their mouth. Because the Bible doesn't clearly say much of anything. Why else would there be so many denominations and belief systems founded because of small differences on the interpretation of the same scripture? It's so important to not take the Bible at face value. Instead, there needs to be an intentional digging up of the roots underneath the words, which means digging up of the culture and the history and the context of the words that we use. The phrase, God helps those who help themselves, comes from a document, but it's not the Bible. Instead, it's taken from Aesop's fable called Hercules and the Wagoneer. A wagoneer was once driving a heavy load, a very muddy way. At last, he came to a part of the road where the wheels sank halfway in the mire, and the more the horses pulled, the deeper sank the wheels. So the wagoneer threw down his whip and knelt down and prayed to Hercules the strong, Hercules, help me in this my hour of distress, quote. But Hercules appeared to him and said, touch the man and don't sprawl here. Get up and put your shoulder to the wheel, guard on your bullets, and never more pray to me for help until you have done your best to help yourself, or depend upon it you will henceforth pray in vain. According to the survey I mentioned earlier from the Barna Group, 81% of Christians think the phrase God helps those who help themselves is actually and literally in the Bible. And that's so very intriguing, isn't it? The vast majority of those surveyed, meaning the vast majority of American Christians, believe that phrase is in the Bible. And perhaps even think that Jesus said it himself, but Jesus most surely did not say, God helps those who help themselves. When you think about it, it should not really be that surprising, that so many American Christians believe that phrase is in the Bible, because the message and meaning of that statement, God helps those who help themselves, goes hand in hand with our society's emphasis and pride on individualism and independence. It's the so-called Protestant work ethic, an idea that one ought to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps. A mentality has made the United States one of the greatest nations today, no question about that. At the same time, our country is not without its faults, as we all know. And neither is that emphasis on individualism and independence. I fall into valuing that line of thinking way too much. It's one of the biggest attitude and mental blocks, and I need to jump over in order to fully live like Christ. I need to constantly remind myself that the practiced idea of ultimate independence and individualism is not a prize to be won. It's not the language of God. It has no role in God's kingdom, or here and in the life after, and it's not the message of Scripture. Some of us take pride in being able to conquer a situation, an issue head-on, by ourselves, and getting the job done without anyone else's help, and that's understandable and reasonable. But is that the way that it always should be? Is that the ideal way to live? The Bible message is not the one that supports the notion of individual efforts above all else. But instead, the Bible message holds the ideal as being and living in community, in cooperation, and the ideal as being one of interdependence with each other, and most important, God. Our scripture for today speaks on the importance of not relying on just yourself. The message of our scripture in Ephesians, which is a letter written specifically to the church in Ephesus. Our scripture's message speaks on the saving actions and grace of God, and that God really acts on our behalf without a first action on anyone else's part. Our scripture discusses our imperfect nature, of flattery and sin and wrongdoing,